Hi, I'm Blake Lively, and I'm going to be taking the BuzzFeed quiz, which iconic Blake Lively character.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Coravanta, your go-to rundown for everything unfolding right now, this Wednesday, April 8th, 2026. There's a lot to unpack today, and honestly, the situation surrounding Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni is no longer just another celebrity headline. It's turning into a full-scale legal war that looks more and more like it's heading straight to trial. What once seemed like a situation that might quietly settle behind closed doors has now taken a completely different turn. The latest updates confirm that settlement talks have essentially collapsed. Both sides had their chance, sat down with a judge in New York, and instead of moving toward resolution, they walked away even further apart. And when that happens in a case like this, it usually means one thing: neither side is willing to back down, and both believe they can win in court. Now, technically speaking, anything can still happen. Deals can be made at the last second, even days before trial. But if you look at the direction this is going, it doesn't feel like either Blake Lively or Justin Baldoni is interested in compromise anymore. The tone has shifted. This is no longer about quiet negotiations, it's about positioning, strategy, and ultimately, public and legal vindication. And one of the biggest developments right now is that Blake Lively is actively trying to find out exactly who will be testifying against her. That's a major move. It tells you her team is preparing for battle, not peace. The center of all this is a case that originally included serious allegations, including claims of harassment and retaliation tied to the film It Ends With Us, where both Lively and Baldoni worked together. But here's where things get critical: the majority of those claims have already been dismissed. 10 out of 13 claims are gone. That changes everything. What remains is much narrower, focused primarily on retaliation. And when a case gets trimmed down like that, momentum becomes a huge factor. From Baldoni's perspective, he's now in a surprisingly strong position. Earlier on, he faced major reputational damage. He was pushed out of projects, distanced from industry circles, and effectively sidelined. Whether you agree with that or not, the reality is he's already taken the hit. So now, the question becomes, what does he actually have to lose by continuing this fight? If anything, going to trial may be his only real chance at clearing his name completely. For him, this isn't just legal, it's survival. His career, his partnerships, even the future of the studio tied to him are all connected to how this ends, and that's why a settlement doesn't make much sense from his side anymore. If you've already endured the worst of the damage, why settle for anything less than full vindication? Especially when the legal momentum seems to be leaning your way. Trials are expensive, yes. They're exhausting, unpredictable, and public. But they also offer something settlements don't: a definitive outcome. On the other side, Blake Lively is in a complicated position of her own. Public perception has shifted dramatically over the course of this case. What may have started with strong support has slowly turned into skepticism, criticism, and in some circles, outright backlash. And that's where things get tricky. Because even if she believes in her case, and she clearly does, the cost of continuing isn't just legal. It's reputational. There's always that moment in high-profile disputes where stepping back, recalibrating, or even apologizing becomes an option. But at this stage, that doesn't seem to be happening. Instead, her legal team is doubling down. One of their latest moves is requesting that the court force Baldoni's side to reveal exactly who will be testifying at trial. Not just general witnesses, but specific individuals, names like Baldoni himself, Jamie Heath, Steve Sarowitz, Melissa Nathan, and Jennifer Abel. This kind of request isn't unusual. In fact, it's a strategic necessity. If you're heading into a trial, you need to know who you're going to face. You need time to prepare, to analyze their potential testimony, to plan cross-examinations. It's about control in a situation where very little is certain. Blake's team is essentially saying, if this is going to trial, we need clarity now. And it also raises interesting questions. Will Baldoni testify himself? Many believe he will. And if he does, he could be a very compelling presence in court. He's articulate, composed, and experienced in public-facing roles. Those qualities matter in front of a jury. Trials aren't just about facts, they're about perception, communication, and credibility. A strong witness can shift the entire tone of a case. At the same time, there's always the element of surprise. Witness lists can evolve. New names can appear. And in a case that already has ties to high-profile individuals, speculation naturally grows. Could someone unexpected be called? Could outside figures become part of the narrative? At this point, nothing feels entirely off the table, but beyond the legal strategies, there's another layer to all of this, the public relations side. And this might actually be where things are getting even more complicated for Blake Lively. Because while legal battles happen in courtrooms, reputations are shaped online, in real time, by millions of people watching, reacting, and forming opinions. There's been growing discussion from PR experts suggesting that Blake's approach may not be working in her favor. The argument is that traditional crisis management, the kind that relies heavily on lawyers and controlled messaging, doesn't function the same way anymore. The internet doesn't wait. It doesn't filter. It reacts instantly and often unpredictably. And in Blake's case, some believe her responses have felt disconnected from how the public is actually interpreting events. For example, using temporary formats like Instagram stories to address serious developments might limit engagement but also reduces transparency. It creates a sense of distance rather than openness. And when people are already questioning your narrative, that distance can work against you. There's also the issue of messaging consistency. When legal wins are presented in a way that feels disconnected from public perception, it can create confusion. Yes, legally speaking, having claims dismissed can be framed as a win. But if the broader audience sees it differently, that framing loses impact. And right now, it seems like there's a gap between what's being communicated and how it's being received. Some critics go even further, suggesting that Blake may be surrounded by advisors who are focused on short-term damage control rather than long-term reputation recovery. That's always a risk in high-pressure situations. When everyone around you is managing different aspects, legal, media, branding, it becomes easy to lose a unified strategy. And that brings us back to the central question: who is actually guiding the overall narrative here? Because in a case like this, it's not enough to win legally. You also have to rebuild trust, reshape perception, and ultimately convince people of your position beyond the courtroom. Meanwhile, the broader context of this case continues to evolve. Public sentiment, media coverage, and even unrelated industry dynamics are all playing a role. And as the trial date approaches, every move, every statement, every filing, every appearance will carry more weight than ever before. This isn't just a legal dispute anymore. It's a story that's unfolding across multiple layers at once: law, media, reputation, and personal stakes all intertwined. And the deeper it goes, the harder it becomes for either side to step away without a definitive conclusion. And while the courtroom battle between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni continues to dominate headlines, it's not the only story unfolding right now that's raising serious questions about accountability, consequences, and how quickly lives can change when private moments become public. Because shifting away from Hollywood legal drama for a moment, there's another situation developing that feels just as heavy, if not more, because it involves something far more personal than career fallout. It involves family, custody, and the kind of decisions that don't just impact headlines, but real lives behind the scenes. Taylor Frankie Paul's situation has taken a sharp and emotional turn, and the latest updates paint a picture that's difficult to ignore. A judge has now ruled that she will be allowed just 8 hours per week with her young son. 8 hours. When you really sit with that number, it doesn't feel like much. It feels like a restriction that speaks volumes about how serious the court views the situation. This isn't a standard arrangement. It's supervised time, broken into small increments, carefully controlled and temporary, set to be reviewed again in just a few weeks, and that alone tells you everything you need to know. Courts don't make decisions like this lightly. When access to a child is limited in this way, it usually means there are ongoing concerns that haven't been resolved yet. In this case, those concerns stem from past incidents that have resurfaced and new investigations that appear to be adding even more complexity to an already fragile situation. The video that re-entered public discussion, despite being from years ago, has had a ripple effect that's impossible to contain. It didn't just damage Taylor's public image. It reshaped how people view her entirely, including those making decisions about her future, both professionally and personally. Losing a major opportunity like The Bachelorette was already a significant blow, but what's happening now goes far beyond television or career setbacks. This is about custody. This is about trust. And this is about whether someone can demonstrate the stability required to be fully present in a child's life. What makes it even more complicated is that the legal battle isn't one-sided. While Dakota had already filed a restraining order against Taylor, she has now responded by filing one of her own. And when both parties in a situation like this begin seeking legal protection from each other, it usually signals a breakdown that goes deeper than a single incident. It becomes a cycle of accusations, defenses, and counteractions, where each side is trying to establish their version of events while the court tries to piece together the truth. And in the middle of all of it is a child who has no control over any of this. That's the part that often gets lost when stories like this become public. The headlines focus on the conflict, the drama, the legal filings, but behind it all, there are real consequences that extend far beyond the adults involved. Supervised visits, temporary custody arrangements, ongoing investigations, these aren't just legal terms. They represent a life being shaped in real time by decisions made in courtrooms. There's also the emotional layer. Taylor has spoken publicly about major changes in her life, including stepping away from her religious community, which for many people is not just a personal shift, it's a complete restructuring of identity, support systems, and stability. Whether that decision was voluntary or influenced by external pressure, it adds another dimension to an already complicated situation. And when everything starts to shift at once, career, public image, relationships, personal beliefs, it can create a kind of instability that's difficult to navigate, especially under constant public scrutiny. That doesn't excuse actions, and it doesn't override accountability, but it does provide context. And context matters, especially when courts are deciding what's in the best interest of a child. Now, as that story continues to develop, there's yet another headline making waves globally, and this one comes with a completely different kind of controversy. Kanye West, one of the most polarizing figures in modern entertainment, has now reportedly been banned from entering the United Kingdom. His scheduled appearance at a major festival has been cancelled, and the situation has quickly escalated from industry backlash to government-level action. And this is where things become complicated in a different way. Because when a country decides to deny entry to a public figure, it's no longer just about entertainment or public opinion. It becomes a matter of policy, values, and what a government determines is acceptable within its borders. The reasoning behind this decision is tied to Kanye's past statements, specifically, remarks that have been widely criticized as anti-Semitic. And while he has, at times, attempted to address or explain those statements, the impact of what was said continues to follow him. In today's environment, public figures aren't just judged by their apologies, they're judged by patterns, consistency, and whether people believe genuine change has taken place. At the same time, there's another layer to this conversation that can't be ignored, and that's Kanye's mental health. He himself has spoken about being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and has described how his condition affects his perception, his behavior, and his decision-making. And if you listen closely to how he explains it, there's a level of awareness there, but also a recognition of how difficult it is to manage mental health, especially at that level, isn't simple. It doesn't follow a predictable path. And when someone is dealing with something like bipolar disorder, particularly when it's not consistently treated, the results can be unpredictable, intense, and at times, damaging not just to themselves, but to others. But here's where the line gets difficult. Understanding someone's mental health challenges doesn't erase the impact of their actions. It doesn't undo harm. And it doesn't guarantee acceptance from the public or from institutions making decisions about safety and representation. That's the balance that's so hard to navigate. Governments have to make decisions based on risk, public sentiment, and the message they want to send. And in this case, the UK has made it clear that they are prioritizing a stance against the kind of rhetoric Kanye has been associated with. Whether people agree with that decision or not, it reflects a broader shift in how seriously these issues are being taken on an institutional level. At the same time, there are those who argue that individuals should be allowed to make their own choices, whether to support, attend, or engage with an artist. That's always been part of the conversation around controversial figures. Where do you draw the line between personal responsibility and institutional control? There isn't a simple answer. And that's what makes this conversation continue to evolve, because on one hand, you have a person dealing with very real mental health challenges, trying, at least in some capacity, to explain what's happening internally. And on the other hand, You have the external impact of words and actions that have affected communities in meaningful ways. Both of those things can exist at the same time. Acknowledging one doesn't cancel out the other. And maybe that's the broader takeaway from everything we're seeing right now, not just with Kanye, but across all these stories. Whether it's a legal battle in Hollywood, a custody case unfolding in real time, or a global controversy involving a major artist, the common thread is complexity. People are complicated. Situations are layered. And the truth is rarely as simple as one headline or one narrative. What matters is how these situations move forward from here. Whether it's accountability in court, stability in family life, or growth and responsibility in public behavior, each of these stories is still being written. None of them have reached a final chapter yet. And as always, we'll continue to follow every development, every update, and every shift in these stories as they unfold. This is Lars Harry, and you're watching Coravanta.